Hi, so I've got a special video for you guys today. It's actually my very first sermon. It was given on Father's Day 2017. There's a couple parts here and there missing, but most of it's pretty much intact. Feel free to leave a comment to let me know what you thought of the video. Thank you. Glennon, some of you may know me from playing the drums here a few times on the band. I want to thank you all for being here today on this wonderful Father's Day. This is my first time giving a sermon, so hopefully it goes well. Spent no less than 10 hours preparing for it. So, thank you. So first of all, I wanted to thank the fathers here today for doing what they do and encourage them. So all the fathers here, could you please stand up? I want to say a quick prayer for you all, for the fathers. Our Father of all fathers, thank you for the gift that is today. Help deliver your words into the hearts and minds of all who are present and listening online. Also, help give all men here the right mindset going forward to lead their families the way you would. In your name, God, do we pray. Amen. So as you can see, Kurt did not make it today. I spoke to him actually just last night, and this is his first Father's Day off since he became a father over 20 years ago. So I really appreciate him giving me the chance, and he also said the same about me doing this so he could do that. Today my sermon is about fear, and it's something I've thought about a lot in my life, just through different circumstances, as I'm sure most do. And what my intent is to basically clear how to get rid of fear together. And so the way I do that is I'm going to break it down into 3 categories of fear. So I'm going to use the Bible to explain how to get rid of it, and I'm also going to ask you some questions that you'll have to take with you to think about in order to let yourself be at peace with it. So the first story I want to tell you is about a little boy. He was 8 years old. He was at the beach one day with his family. It was a really nice day, sunny day. The sand felt really great on his toes, and he was there with his older siblings, and he had 2 older brothers, 3 older sisters. Two of his brothers just ran up the dunes, as they do. They want to get away from their families and play. So they were off, and then he had a sister who was standing next to him where he was playing, and then a couple sisters out in the water. And after a while, he tried playing with seagulls, and he chased them long enough. He just bored of that. He went up the dunes to see if he could find his brothers. Couldn't find them, so he came back down. And then he settled on making a sandcastle for a bit. Making a sandcastle with his little bucket and shovel. And when he did that, he put the rocks for windows and the little seashells for the doors and a piece of driftwood for his little bridge. After that, he decided that he wanted to go into the water. So he looked out to his sisters, and he could see they were just beyond where probably it was too deep for him. And he could remember his mom telling him that he wasn't supposed to go past waist deep because it could be dangerous. But he thought, it's not too much further, I'll be fine. So he ended up going out there, and as he's going, he's just trudging through the water, and it's getting to waist deep, and it just started getting really difficult. He was just paying attention to what he was doing. But what he wasn't doing was he forgot to look up at what was ahead of him. And by the time he did, he looked forward, and his sisters were gone. Actually, there was no one there. So he looked left, a little bit panicked, to see if they were over there. Maybe he just missed them a little bit. They weren't over there, so he looked right, and they were very far right. So he was very worried at 8 years old. He didn't really he knew he was beyond where he should be. So he tried going towards them. At this point, it was probably chest high, and he just couldn't catch his footing on the ground, and it just kept slipping. And after a while, he noticed he was actually getting farther away from them, and farther away from everyone else too. And at the point when it got to his mouth, he decided to turn back towards shore and try swimming instead of going to his sisters. So he began doing that with his little doggy paddling, because that's all he knew at the time. And as he was doing that, he realized that he really wasn't going anywhere that way either. So he began to decide to scream out for help. No one was really that near, and he was screaming, and no one was hearing him, and it just got to the point where the water was going in his mouth, and he just couldn't get out more than a gargle. And at that point, he had to start hopping up and down off the ground to gain some air, because it was just too tall for him then. And doing that, he realized that it was pretty much it. He couldn't do anything unless somebody came to get him. And then it got above his head, and he was just getting barely any air every time. And so then he remembered a little story that he was told in Bible school to reach out to God when you need help. And so what he did, he put his right hand in the air. And at this point, it was even jumping. It was only reaching a few inches out of the water. But what the boy told himself was that he was going to pray. So he prayed to God, and he said, God, if this is it for me, that's okay. He began, after all that fear, he just let it all go, and he went to complete peace with it. He just gave it all to God. Said, if you save me, I will do anything you want with my life, and I will help you the rest of my life. But if you don't, that's okay, if this is my time. Which is crazy at 8 years old. But what happened next was that he couldn't breathe anymore, and he lost consciousness. Soon after that, he died. This happens pretty often. So the reason I want to point out this story doesn't really end there. His family was still at the beach, and they were looking for him, you know. And it was just so terrifying for them, you know. And after that, you know, they'll never let something petty get in the way of their relationship with family again. Something like that just wouldn't happen anymore. And he made such a difference in their lives just by that one simple thing. And the boy was at peace with it, and the family didn't know that. So I have a verse I want to share with you that relates, I think, very closely with this story. The verse is Isaiah 41:13. For I am the Lord your God, who takes hold of your right hand and says to you, do not fear, I will help you. So if you remember in the story, he put up his right hand and asked for God's help. And in this story, he really, you know, just gave it all to God. And that was very closely related to this verse. Now, what I want to tell you, it may surprise you. You'll probably be relieved to hear this boy is actually now a man. He calls this moment the moment he died, because to him, he was going to die. He was done. He was gone. He woke up on the beach, threw up on the lifeguard, and that was that. But to him, that fear would never take hold of him again, because it just wasn't something he was scared of anymore, knowing the peace he felt. That's not to condone it. I'm just saying, you know, we always fear this thing, and I don't think God ever meant it to be scary. And I think a lot of times you'll find that it's not. Now, the final question I want to ask about this, which I think if you can answer it, you'll feel at peace like he did about this fear. The fear of ourselves dying. But the final question is, am I right with God? So you need to ask yourself, do I know for sure the way to be saved? And if you can say yes, definitively yes, then that fear should never bother you again. I know it's can make you feel uneasy to think about that question, but as you think about it, it really should help once you find the answer. If you haven't found the answer, come talk to me in the church. I'd love to tell you. Also, Kurt does this full time, and he'd love to talk to you about it. The second story I want to tell you is the fear we have for others. When we fear for family members, loved ones, significant others. This story begins with a young man that, took his daughter to school every day, every morning, and brought her home every evening after school. And it was the highlight of his day to pick her up and talk to her about what went on that day, because his job just felt the same every day. It was nothing that exciting for him. So what he did, he takes her every day, and then one morning his car just wouldn't start. And already he was just upset about that he wouldn't be able to take his daughter to school. So he called on a parent, can you please take her so I can go to work? And he asked his other parent if he could borrow the car. So grandfather ended up taking her, and his mother ended up loaning the car to him to go to work. And that day ended up being just super busy. It was just going to take too long. He couldn't get home on time. He couldn't get to the school on time to pick her up. So unfortunately, he had to ask someone else to do it. So once again, he calls on his family. And he's just like, this is just the worst day for me. And he asked for his father again to go pick up his daughter, and he does. And finally, a half hour or so after work was closed, he still had a lot of work to do, but he just was so upset by it that he just felt like he had to go, and he just left the work that was there to do and went to go get his daughter from his parents' house. Now, about 10 minutes away from his parents' house, he was stuck on a 2-lane road, and it was rush hour. It was like 5:36, and it was just way too busy, and this person wanted to turn across traffic, so they put their turn signal on, and he stuck behind them. Frantically looks up in his rearview mirror and notices actually that there's an SUV oncoming, and it's not coming slow, it's speeding up. So clearly they didn't notice he was there, and he didn't have much time to react, but what he did was let go of the brake and hold on to the steering wheel, and he just let that play out. So when he came back to, he looked at the time. The time was still working, and the clock was still working in the car. And he looks and he sees that it was actually the time his daughter would be in the car with him. And horrified, he looks back in the back seat and sees that his daughter isn't there, but what is the trunk all the way back to his seat. So seeing that, it just overcame him. He just couldn't help but crying, thinking that thankfully his daughter wasn't there, because she wouldn't have made it. But what also he thought about was that, what if I died? Did I ever tell her how to be saved? She's young, she was young but old enough to know. And he just felt so guilty about that. Suddenly, that any moment could pass, and he didn't get the chance. And what if he passed away and she would maybe never have anyone to tell her. It was his job as the father to make sure the kid knew. And so that really hit him pretty hard. Amazingly, he stepped out of the vehicle and was completely unharmed, not a scratch at all, even though the vehicle was totaled beyond belief. So this story, I think it matters to all of us today. Of course, he went and told his daughter immediately that day when he got home. Why it matters to us today is his family needs, he needs to be telling his daughter, as we all do as fathers, we need to be telling our kids the truth, how to be saved, because this is a tough world sometimes, and not every day is promised, and anything could happen to them or something could happen to us. So the verse I picked for this is Matthew 6:34. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. The way I see this is get right today, and tomorrow you won't have to worry. You won't have to worry about tomorrow anymore. Get right with yourself, get right with your family. Make sure your family understands how to be saved. Don't worry about what could happen anymore. Live with and love your family today. Now, the question I have for this one is that you should ask yourself is, where will those around me be if I die? And I know that's pretty much what I've been going on with this story about, but you have to really inwardly think about what could happen and consider that to yourself. If you know the answer, then you should be relieved. Now, I'm going to move on to the next story. This story is about the fear of others. This story starts with a 24-year-old man. He'd never flown in a plane before. He'd never been out of the country. He might have been like 3 states away from his hometown his entire life, and that's it. And so then one day, he'd been struggling with faith for years, wondering, it wasn't people that he disliked, it was that he just couldn't make it make sense, And for him, he needed something more. So he decided, if I'm going to believe in this, I'm going to go see for myself. So he bought a ticket to go to Israel, to Tel Aviv airport, and to get off and go to Palestine and see Bethlehem and Jerusalem and all the sites. So he had a friend that lived out there, so he knew he'd be able to see somebody. So that what he did is, the time came and he just went, and without fear, a 16-hour flight, very far. There was one time where he had to get off and get on a different plane, and there was like 1 hour between it. So he really didn't have enough time, and he didn't know enough about flying that was too little of time, really. He had to rush from one plane to the next. So he just barely made it on with the help of some stewardesses and stuff that knew English in Paris. So getting onto that plane, he got over to Tel Aviv. When he got up at Tel Aviv, he realized how different it is over there. There was like no one he could talk to that spoke English, and he just, because in Paris, he just thought, okay, there's a lot of people here, I'll be fine. So when he landed, complete culture shock, nobody spoke English, no one could help him. He asked security guards, armed security guards, he asked people in a restaurant, he asked people at the help desk, and they didn't speak English either. And eventually he just ended up walking out. He ended up finding his way out after like 30 minutes. And he stepped out and he pulled out a piece of paper. The night before, his friend had called him to tell him, this is what you need to do. Okay, when you get there, because he already knew, he lived there. He said, when you get there, you need to look for something called a shrub, and you need to ask to go to the American Colony Hotel. So I pulled out my piece. He pulled out his piece of paper. And he pulled out his piece of paper, and he said, he looked at it, and it said shirt, and it said American Cow. And he was like, okay, well, clearly I was too excited, didn't pay attention when I talked to my friend. So he looks out and he's like, there's no shirts around. What am I supposed to do? He just stands there and looking around. Eventually somebody just grabs a bag off his back, takes his suitcase, and walks away. And he's like, what is going on? And so he ends up chasing the guy down. The guy throws it in his car and points in the car. And he's like, shirt? And the guy didn't even say anything. He just looked at him. And then, he just got in the car, and there was somebody else in the car too. And it was a van, actually. And he was very disturbed, obviously. It felt really uncomfortable to get things taken from you and just told to get in the car. And he's seen this in movies, people being kidnapped. And so he gets in, and he's climbing into the back seat. And next to him, he sees this guy. The guy just staring him down very awkwardly. And they take off. And he's just like, American cow? The guy didn't say anything, they just ignore him. So then somebody else, he stops the van, and 3 more people get in the car. And they just, packing around him, and they just stare at him for about another 10 minutes. And then they stop, and one guy gets out, another guy gets in, and he didn't know what was going on, and it looked like the driver handed the guy something. And then they go off, and they're in an area of town where there's no lights, and the houses are all beat up, and it's like a really thin dirt road, and he's like, great, I'm really in for it now, I'm out of town. And then you see somebody get out, and then the man turns around and goes back down the hill and back into the city. And then suddenly the driver stops and gets out, takes his bags, puts it on the sidewalk, and points at the sidewalk. And he's like, okay. So he gets out, and then he points at his pocket, the driver. And so then he ends up giving him like a lot of cash. So he's like, okay, I'd rather just, if I'm not being kidnapped, fine, whatever. And so then he, gets there, and he ends up walking into the American colony. He released him right there. And he walks in, and he sees Nasser. I think you get it now. Okay. Nasser there said, Martin, you way overpaid for that thing. And I said, I don't care, I wasn't kidnapped. So then, that story, now that you know, is mine. I'm sure most of you get that the other 2 were about me as well. I'm sure my mom caught on because she really loved that car. This is my mom up here. And the story about me being a child at 8 years old is true as well. That moment was one of the scariest moments of my life. But once it got to a point where I gave up control to God, all fear left me. And I've never been scared to this day of something like that. Sure, I was scared in Palestine of getting kidnapped, but that was for other reasons. I mean, you don't know, maybe getting tortured or whatever. So the verse I have for this one is Matthew 10:28. So this verse about this story says, do not be afraid of those who can kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. It relates because I should not have been fearing what others can do to me, because God will let me die only when it's my time. That's the way I see it, and that's how I felt ever since I was 8 years old and that first story happened to me. The question I have for you is, was my time here worth something? So a lot of times when something comes up that's kind of scary, I question, have I lived out my purpose? And most of the time I'm feeling like, probably not. I don't feel like I've done much. And in a way that actually gives me some peace, knowing that, God has something for me. I know that because He saved me when I was 8. And I haven't done anything significant to me yet. And I feel like that gives me peace, knowing that I have that much more time left. If you feel you have not lived God's purpose yet, you're probably right. You should get to it, and I promise you have nothing to stress over unless your purpose is finished, and in which case you'll not feel stressed over that anyway. But I have a warning, do not ignore your purpose once you know what it is. God has such a better life plan for us than we do. The final verse I have to conclude all these stories is 1 Chronicles 28:20. This story is about David and his son Solomon. David also said to Solomon his son, "Be strong and courageous, and do the work. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord God, my God, is with you. He will not fail you or forsake you until all the work for your service of the temple of the Lord is finished." The reason he said this is Solomon was chosen by God to build a temple to hold the Ark of the Covenant. Solomon was. So when Solomon was fearing, his father said, "Do not fear, you're not finished. God will not take you from your purpose." So once we start our purpose, what I get from this verse is once we start here, hell cannot have us. Our God-given purpose will save us. I believe it saved Kurt as well, because I don't think he's done. Fundamentals of fear. One more time, I want to bring up these fundamentals of fear that I discussed in these three stories. And the three fundamentals are fear for ourselves, fear for others, and fear of others. Now, bringing up these questions next, I'm just reiterating that if you are able to answer these three questions, you have nothing to fear. Because either your purpose isn't lived out yet, or it is, and you're at peace with it. Now, when you can answer all three questions, you'll feel a lot better, and I feel pretty good myself. Now, I wanted to say one last thing to the fathers in this room. Never stop learning, and make sure your family knows you love them by getting the truth to them with love and not forcefulness. Go in peace. Thank you.